Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Jason.
With me today is life coach and LOA teacher Joel Elston.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
Joel, as the intro was playing, I just realized something because the topic for today is habits and how we develop them and how we use them and how they can work against us or they can work in our favor. But the thing that I just realized is everything we do, including this podcast, is habitual. I mean, we do this. I mean, it's not like this is a bad habit that we're doing. This is actually a good habit.
Sure.
But it's habitual and it feels wrong if we don't do it. It feels like something, got torn out of the week or something. And not that we don't survive. And sometimes we've had to cancel or whatever, but we always want to go back to it. And I think it's because we habitually like it.
Sure.
Right?
Well, yeah. There's almost a negative connotation to the word habitual.
Right.
Of course, as with all things, there's dual meanings, and habitual or habits are they can serve you or they can be horrible for you. It's just they exist for a reason. They exist in the subconscious brain. That's basically describing the subconscious brain process, the habit of your heart beating, the habit of your eyes blinking, the habit of, it's just all of that. All of those things are conditioned to take place subconsciously. So when they become ingrained, one of my favorite habits, story about habits was probably about 5 years ago, we leased a new office space. And I was in the other office space for about 7 years. Mm-hmm. So the first day that I went to the new office space from my house, I went to the old place.
Yeah, of course, yes.
Yeah, and I laughed, and it's only probably 2 miles, 3 miles from that, so it was not an altering event.
Right.
It was funny because I was on cruise control mentally, how to get to work, and I laughed because I pulled in the parking lot and I realized I'm in the wrong office, and then now if I were to try to go to the other office, I would have to the new habit has been formed. So if I were to go back to the other office, I would have to make a special effort because then, even though it's only 2 miles away, it's an entirely different way to get there from where I am.
Yeah.
And plus, I've moved since then, which had to create another habit.
That's right. Now you got a different route to work.
Yes, another the habits, and it shows you sort of, and this will get relevant how it affects what we're sort of trying to do. But you ever have the electricity go out due to a storm, and you keep turning the light switch every time you walk into another room? You know the electricity's off, but out of habit,
you gotta just try it, just in case.
Yeah, and I laugh every time I do that because it's such a you are conditioned to do a certain act, and when if I were to describe in detail a big juicy lemon and I'm peeling it and describe it to you, your mouth will water. Its conditioned response is a bedfellow of habits, because a conditioned response usually elicits an activity. The room is dark. I walked in the room, hit the light switch, up, electricity's out. It's just that process that goes on, and habits are necessary. They speed things up, make life a lot easier because you don't have to constantly process with the conscious brain. The problem with habits, they can be, even when they don't serve you or they keep you stuck, then that's when you have to work on the reprogramming part. And that's when the habit of something, when people try to quit smoking, there's at least two things that I hear all the time. There's the initial stopping of smoking is the cravings of nicotine are outrageous. That's the hardest part.
Sure.
To some people. The other part is the habit of smoking. So you're in a crowd, you smoke for 15 years of your life, you're in a crowd standing outside somewhere, and what do you do with your hands? What do you do when everyone else smokes? So the habit of smoking and the addiction of smoking are two different things often. So habits sort of take place and they serve, or they can really be distractions, or they can actually be detrimental to you. So that's like everything else we talk about, perspective dictates which one.
Yeah, that's true. And in fact, as you were telling your story about the electricity and how we reach for the light switch, I also do it the other way around. Like if the electricity goes off like late afternoon and by bedtime it hasn't come back on, I will go around trying light switches to turn lights off even though there's no light on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Say, no, wait a minute. Did I leave that switch on? No, I didn't leave that one on. And now, but if I turn that one off, Am I really turning it off or am I turning it on? And then I'll drive myself crazy because I'm following the habit of going around and turning off lights, and I can't remember which lights were on.
Well, exactly. And then at 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning, when the lights come back on, the
Right.
electricity was for all the lights in the house are on, the TV turns on, or whatever. It's just that's the process. But the life is full of habits. They exist for a reason. And you also can get into the habit of eating poorly, the habit of being lazy, the habit of staying in bad relationships is a habit. I hear people all the time saying, well, I mean, we're comfortable, we're where we're at, I don't have to go through that again. And so instead of the effort of I want to improve things in my life, habits sort of also can keep us stuck if you allow them to.
How often do you think people engage in habitual behavior that has a negative connotation, one that doesn't serve them, without realizing it's a habit?
Oh, probably in some form or fashion every day. A habit of what would be, and you know me well enough, how I think, but what you think is the worst habit? What do you think off the top of your head?
The worst habit that one could
Yes.
have?
Yes.
Of being a serial killer?
Okay. Well, I didn't really equate that, but let's call that number one. But less that, more
a little bit less violent.
The habit of negative thinking and a negative internal dialogue.
Oh, well, that's fair. Yeah.
Seriously, that is the worst of all the habits because that perpetuates other things. So it is people that when you're used to having a negative victim mindset, always in that mode, that becomes habitual. And that is, to me, what keeps most people who claim to be stuck in something stuck.
Yes. I would say that also is a great example of what I was talking about, not being aware of it. I don't think there are a lot of people in the world who spend a lot of time giving their attention to negative things who realize that by doing so, they're creating the habit of giving their attention to negative things.
In fact, most people who you ask that will tell you, I'm very positive. And then
that's right. Yeah,
you're right. Now, admittedly, the category of serial killer you brought up, that's I can see that one. But wasn't expecting that. But I will also go on a limb and really hope I'm right about this. I don't think that many people have that habit.
I would hope not. Yeah.
But there are some.
Sadly, yes.
Yeah.
But the fact is that because habits can be hidden from us, or maybe more accurately, there are habits that we hide from ourselves. We don't really acknowledge their existence. I mean, we kind of know. It's not like you don't know that you're doing something over and over again. It's just that you don't really treat it as, well, that's just something that's habitual. You don't think about it. You don't give it that attention.
Right. And that's sort of the process. The habits are, while intended, in their best form, habits save time. They save brain processing power. The subconscious brain is far more capable and faster in so many areas than the conscious brain. So the habits exist there. The problem with the subconscious brain, it has no logic. It has no. It's just taking place. It's doing what you so the subconscious brain, like the law of attraction, has no opinion on anything. It just simply says, this is what we do. So the habit is there. Now, the conscious brain is the one that needs to signal that and say, me eating half a gallon of ice cream every single night may be the cause of my type 2 diabetes and me weighing 258 pounds. Might be.
It's a possibility. Yeah.
But so the conscious brain knows that, and we got to take efforts to sort of disconnect that habit to have improvement. The conscious brain simply does it. The subconscious brain just goes, we don't care. You keep doing it. We're going to keep doing that.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about there's one activity that I know you don't engage in. I engage in it only very, very minimally, and there are periods where I don't engage in it at all, and that's following the news. There are people who literally habitually follow the news, and they give a lot of reasons. If you question them about that, and I know you have, if you question them about it, they have all the reasons lined up about why it's important to read the news. They have to stay informed. They have to know what's going on in the world. They need to be paying attention to stuff. Isn't it interesting all the different ways that we find to justify a habit?
Yeah. Well, for example, the news thing, it feels necessary. It feels like you're saying, I have to be informed. I have to. Why? What actions are you going to do differently with that information? What are you going to do other than maybe vote or donating political stuff? There's nothing else you can do. But yet the idea that watching the news to some people feels necessary. Some people think worry and anxiety, worry is a necessary component of life. It serves no value. It seems to be important to some people, but it's not. So watching the news or worry or those things that we will make allowances or excuses for them. I'm working with this gentleman that he's 74 years old. He drinks a lot, and there's a lot of factors in his life, and he doesn't, he knows it on some level, but he drinks because he has high anxiety, and then he drinks so much it increases his anxiety. And when I ask him what he's worried about, he goes, all the events in the world, all the events, and he watches the news. I said, have you thought about turning off the news? And he's like, I could never do that. What? I have to be informed. I said, why? He said, well, I just have to be informed. That would be irresponsible. I go, but why? And he will never stop watching the news. It was programmed. He said, my dad read the paper every morning. My granddad read the paper every morning. And watched the evening news. I said, but how did that benefit their life? What changed in their life? If apparently, because I can't help but pick up some news, there's a bit of tension in the Middle East from what I'm gathering out there.
Well, you can bet on that just about any time of any year.
Right. My point, and I'm not trying to be. I think it's instead of the normal amount, we have a little bit more. But
there's a substantial amount. There is.
Yeah. So this is not me not caring about the Middle East and the issue. What remedy do I have for the Middle East? What remedy do I have to do that? It can cause me stress. It can cause me anxiety. I have a friend that's a financial advisor, and he agrees that the news is addicting, but he feels he needs to be informed because the financial markets are often affected by these events. So, he's like, so he developed a way of sort of finding the most unbiased, factually reporting news, and he watches that. And, those are things that are helpful to be able to not be triggered by them, but nonetheless, watching the news and then world conditions and in my lifetime, I've lived a long time now, and I don't know how many apocalypses or near apocalypses I've lived through. I mean, there've been so many as a child. I can remember being scared to death when we were literally talking about what that event was going to be in church, because they were always framing it. Armageddon was imminent. I was told when I was 8 years old. I was like, it was imminent. It was time.
Right.
And and since then I've heard various forms of that story, and shockingly, we have not had any now at this point. So I but the way I look at it, this is not about not caring about people. It's simply understanding the habit or the thing we feel are necessary. If you were to do an inventory of everything you do in a day and everything you think in a day, how much is actually really important to the functioning of your day?
That's a scary question to answer.
Well, I can't speak for anybody else's brain because I have a particularly active brain. And so I know probably 98% of what I process in my brain is useless, to be honest with you. It's not, it's just the way my brain works. I've learned to manage it. I've learned to handle it. But imagine a brain where you wake up in the morning and it just goes a million different directions all day. That's what my brain does. Now, I spent a lot of years understanding my brain and getting it. When you fix or you learn to manage your ADHD like I have, it doesn't mean that the brain doesn't still do that. It's just I'm able now to monitor and pick the parts that matter.
Which is a very important thing to be able to do.
Yes.
For myself, I actually took a different tack because I deliberately wanted to stop that incessant flow of thoughts. It was driving me nuts, and ended up doing mirror work to do it because I'd heard that what's his name? The guy who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul, Jack
Yes. Canfield.
Canfield.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because he had written an article about how he had used mirror work to shut that stuff off. I said, well, if Jack Canfield does it, I'm going to do it too. So I tried it, and sure enough, it works. I mean, I did it for about a 50-day period, and by the end of that 50 days, I mean, it was shut down. There was nothing coming through that I didn't want to deliberately think about. Now, I didn't stay with it, and it still comes back at times, but I don't get that incessant flow anymore, and I love that. I love that. That actually is one of the most important things that I ever did in order to accomplish one of my heartfelt goals, which was to raise my vibration on a regular basis.
Sure.
And by shutting down that flow of stuff that I really didn't want going on in my head, it made a whole bunch of space available to me that I could rise up the vibration on. Before I was fighting against it all the time. With that out of the way, like, oh my God, this is so much easier.
Well, and the right along with the habit discussion that we're talking about, and the way the brain flows and thinks and worries, is there's subcategories of our brain. So one of the factors that we have a habit of is making assumptions and filling in the blanks for things we don't know.
Right.
Now, when we fill in the blanks with stuff we don't know, the vast majority of the time we use negative programming to fill in those blanks.
Yes. Oh boy. Oof.
So here's an example. You text a good friend who normally responds relatively quickly. And that person, for whatever reason, you're unaware to you, there's somebody who almost always answers unless they're working or whatever. Well, you don't hear from them for like 9 hours. And then you start thinking, wonder what happened. Are they mad at me? Right. Number one. Number two, did they get in a car wreck? Why aren't they answering me? Why can't, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And it goes on. And 99.9% of the time, it's something like, oh, I missed your text. I was, when I travel, sometimes when I travel and I get into areas, there's often times where I don't take my phone with me places, on purpose. I have a second phone that I use for that nobody uses that number, but I have it like when I do travel, I can take pictures with it. I could, do things. Sure. And then when I get back to my house or hotel room, wherever I'm staying, then I have my other phone where I can respond to messages and stuff. But I like, if I'm out trying to enjoy vacation, the way my world works, I can have 15 emergency texts in a 10-minute period, and I don't want to ruin my trip. So I have a method to do that. But there's people that, if they didn't know I was on a trip, could assume I'm ignoring them, that I'm ill, anything.
Isn't it interesting that the way and the number of ways that we will defend our habit, because that's really what that is. That's habit defense.
Absolutely.
And in the process of defending our habit, like you were saying, we do so using negatives rather than positives. Why don't we ever talk ourselves into it being a positive? We always have to talk about it being a negative. I mean, do you know why?
Yes, we're conditioned. From the beginning of time, it is Darwin's theory. We hand that down. It's genetic. The worry brain is the one that is encouraged to evolve. It's the one that survived. The most worried brain is the one that survived the most. So that's what we do. Negative feedback is literally in our DNA.
So basically, what has kept us going is having imaginary Jewish mothers.
Absolutely. I don't. This might be Mike Dooley's thing, but I stole it. So I'll give Mike. This is pre-crazy Mike. The concept that he told a story about Ugg and Hug, and these are two cave women that existed during cave women time, whenever that was, and they Hug was super social, kind, sweet, always saw the good, saw positive. Ugg was super negative, always believing the worst was about to happen, always on alert. So they go to get water down by the pond, and as they're getting water, there's a sound. Ugg immediately takes off, assuming it's the worst. Hug wanted to see who it was. It turns out it was a saber-toothed tiger who ate Hug. Hug's dead. Hug's DNA and genetic propensity to negativity is the one that got passed on. Imagine that generation after generation after generation. So the propensity to be negative, we hand down all that stuff. It literally is in our DNA. It's been formed in our DNA. Now, epigenetics tells us that we can reprogram that and not have that there. But to really get away from stuff that's in your DNA, it takes a lot of effort.
Okay. Interesting that you say that it's in the DNA. Just because from what I understand about DNA, there are a lot less things in DNA than what they originally thought.
Well, okay, not really, but I'll tell you why. So there's a worm, and I wish I remember the name of the worm because this would make the story a lot better. But the worm actually had X number of chromosomes. So once they identified all the chromosomes and in the worm, they said, well, humans are far more complex, so they're going to have more chromosomes.
Ah.
Turns out humans have less. The
Fewer.
fruit fly, by the way, is another one of these creatures that has more chromosomes than a human. That Dr. Bruce Lipton, who's written many books on the topics of epigenetics, so that blew them away. That all of a sudden we were expecting, millions possibly of chromosomes, or the DNA, all that DNA turns out to be 23, and
something really small,
very small. So what we missed in the original hypothesis was there's switches within DNA. There's options in DNA. So like we can have all of this DNA, and it's very specific, the combinations of DNA, but within DNA, there's switches that turn on and off. And like when a baby is born to a mom, there's a natural instinct to seek breast milk. Almost drawn. There's nobody that told them that.
Right.
Horses, when they're born, have an immediate just DNA. They're told to stand up. They start trying to stand immediately. It's just they are built with certain fears. So there's certain basic coding that is handed down, and so that coding is within the DNA, but it is also built. It's not just a switch to say, here's the negative factor in DNA. It's part of the switch and switching off. So epigenetics, this is really getting deep and it's hard to explain, but epigenetics suggests that you can turn DNA switches on and off. For example, years ago, they identified the primary gene in breast cancer for women. So there's women that have this gene that has a higher propensity for breast cancer. So Angelina Jolie years ago had that gene, and she actually had her breast removed and went with implants to avoid cancer.
Wow.
The problem with that was that switch might not have ever been turned on. You can have the gene, it doesn't necessarily have to be turned on. Right. And it can be turned on later, it can be turned off too. So it gets more complicated than just the number. So all these things, we're still working on understanding all these switches and all the stuff that takes place within DNA. But the stuff that's handed down, instinct is handed down, natural fear of certain things. It's handed down. And it's one of those things we can work on and change. But probably the most consistent thing that has been handed down generationally is fear and anxiety and stress, because it does support homeostasis of nothing needs to change. That's built in.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and it does make some sense in kind of a negative way, but it does make some sense.
There's a positive side to it. It's all, you can override all of this. Just you have to be aware of it. It's there, but you can override it. It's just most people don't think that's something that can be overridden. DNA is not the way it exists, how it presents is not always just stuff. That's what Bruce Lipton got out of traditional physics for, because of that. He fought that theory. And and that's where epigenetics plays such a large role. I really, his book, The Biology of Belief, is really a great book to understand all this with.
Yeah, it is. And I can go along with you and recommend that to readers. It's definitely worth reading. When we're talking about this, though, and we're talking about it in the context of habits, there are a number of things that run through my mind. One thing that runs through my mind is that we see a pattern that happens from one generation to the next. At least I do. And I've confirmed with other people that they see it too. It's that each succeeding generation ends up being smarter than the previous one. It has more knowledge built in from the moment that they're born. Probably the easiest example of that is when the millennials came along, they just took right to the devices, the computers, and later the smartphones. It was easy for them. And I believe that becomes a built-in habit from the moment that you're born. It's like you habitually have that. So, I mean, that kind of ties into what you're talking about the genetics and the epigenetics, but it also makes me wonder if we have habits that are passed along to us in a way that we're getting stuff that the previous generation really never had. Well, first of all, is that necessarily a negative? To me, that's more of a positive. And secondly, isn't that an indication that there's more going on than just the passing of a habit? Because otherwise, the previous generations would have had it too.
It's far more complicated than just passing of habit. You're right. And, the idea that, for example, the current generation of kids, they take, as you're saying, they take to technology immediately. It's nothing to see a 2-year-old operating a tablet very efficiently, actually.
Oh, yeah.
That there's kids that can operate a tablet before they can talk.
Right.
It's just they have figured out that. Now, the average person will go, well, I mean, is that new or evolution? No. Tablets didn't exist when I was a child, so there's no ground. The brain is fully wide open, fully programmed at that age. So the idea that anything is really teachable at that age, and yeah, it's simple to them. Press this button, this video plays. That's simple. The infants have more knowledge of or more capacity, it seems like, to deal with electronics than senior citizens, because they're
Absolutely.
so reluctant to learn. Senior citizens, it isn't that they can't do it, they're so conditioned to believe they can't that they won't.
But there's also more to it than that, because the younger generation, generation coming into it, yeah, they're learning it very easily, but they also are much more able to intuit it. In other words, I mean, we both know that with tablets and phones and websites and so forth, there's so much out there that's counterintuitive. I mean, despite what the developers and designers like to claim that they're doing, there isn't a whole lot of an intuitive approach to the way these interfaces are built. There is some, but how often do you end up, interacting with something and say, where the hell is this feature? I know it's got to be in here somewhere, but I can't find it for the life of me. So, but somebody who's younger generation is going to find it a whole lot faster. And I can't attribute all of that to, well, they're just not resistant. I think there's got to be more of an information pass going on there.
Possibly. And also when you get a general concept of something where, if learning to drive with a stick shift is much more difficult to learn than not having or having an automatic transmission, it seems. Mm-hmm. However, for many, many years, the only option for people was, just manual transmission.
That's how you did it. Yeah.
It just didn't make any sense. I mean, how was that stuff? Right now, probably one of the best deterrents to car theft is nobody knows how to drive a manual transmission.
Nobody's actually stick anymore.
Yeah. So I have a friend that got this brand new Porsche, beautiful car, and it's a 5-speed, whatever, manual transmission. Mm. And so I took it for a spin. I haven't driven a manual transmission in probably 20 years. Mm. Didn't miss a beat. Just went
right. If you've done it,
Yeah, it's already there. So I didn't have to look at the pattern on this. It was a standard pattern. I didn't have to look on that. I did ask him, was reversed to the right and up or to the right and down? It was just right and down. And that was it. And I didn't miss a beat. So again, that's previous information that was stored. But as you there are parts of this that, again, this is where epigenetics suggests we do pass down that knowledge at a different rate with stuff that we are not aware of. If you don't think that we're aware of when you're born, but we have no way of knowing. Trauma is passed down. And that's another thing that that I don't want to get into all that, but trauma gets passed down. And it's just kids that are born to very anxious moms tend to have very anxious brains. They spent their whole 9 months of their the first 9 months of life being surrounded by stress chemicals. Right. And they come out sort of addicted to that. Moms that are opiate users, the kids come out addicted to opiates. That's more of a physical connection, but same concept. So all of this is habits tend to, what levels are handed down or not handed down or learned. Habits are intended to serve and to bypass all the efforts of the conscious brain. But that's always going to be the positive side of habits. But there's also always going to, with everything positive, there can be a negative observation of that while it's working. Habits can become addicting. Habits can become very hard to break. And like I said, the worst habit of all is that negative internal dialogue that no matter, it took me years to really get to a place where I can, and that doesn't mean I still don't have negative thoughts. Sure. I just can quickly reframe them now. Took years to get there. Years.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying entirely. I want to tie this into something else too that we've talked about a lot. In fact, it's a concept that you were the first to introduce me to back when we did our first interview 12 and a half years ago. When you told me your story, you told me, you'd been through the addiction to gambling, and you'd gone to Vegas, lost the money, all that, the whole story. And then you finished up by saying that something that you've repeated many, many times here on the show, that you never want to go through it again, but it was the best thing that ever happened. And you're really grateful that you went through that. I'm wondering if one of the reasons why because lots of people have told me that same kind of story. I mean, I've had hundreds of guests on the show now in the time that has ensued, and over again, someone who comes onto the show who had some traumatic event happen, they never want to go through it again, but same thing. They learned so much from it. Good things came out of it, a whole bunch of stuff, yada, yada, yada. That same pattern plays out over and over again. I wonder if one of the reasons why these seminal events, these traumatic events, has such a big impact on us is because they break up our habit. Because we went through something that we would never want to go through again. And we literally had to shift something, which involved breaking some habits and changing some habits up in order to move on. In fact, you even told us very point blank, there was a period of time there where you had no choice. It was just, I had to do this. There was nothing else to do. And you were kind of forced to break some habits.
Oh yeah. Well, there was no option. There was no place to live. There was no money. So it was me accepting life on life's terms at that moment. It didn't matter what habit I had. There was no way to practice that habit. No matter what I had to, there was no option given. And that's exactly right. When you get to, you hear the term in addiction in general, where people have to hit a bottom. That's that can be a very nebulous concept, but just using that basic concept to discuss it. So a bottom is when there's just no other option. There's just you have no one to turn to, the enablement to stop, the habit of what you're doing. It doesn't matter what the habit is because you just can't do it. At some point, there was no way I could possibly gamble, but there was no way to get my hands on a penny. There was nothing left. There was, I always say my life was so unmanageable that the state of Florida insisted on managing it for me for a while. They managed it for me, and they provided me a structure in jail, but again, even within jail, there was a process for me that, okay, this is something I don't ever want to do again. So I use that to make sure I break the habit. So I do believe that when you go through things in life, not only does it strengthen you, which is always my main message.
Right.
I also concur with what you're saying. I really feel that it forces you to break the habits that don't serve you. It forces you to, because it's just, you can't coexist with the life you want with the habits of the old life. Now, the good habits I have every day, I get up, I eat my eggs every day. I take my supplements every day. I drink my coffee. I do my meditation. These are habits that I have in place that support the life I have now.
Mm-hmm.
They're positive. My morning routine is fundamental for my life and my mindset.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Which goes to
It
prove that
certainly
habits
will.
work either way. I mean, there's not all habits are negative, which you pointed out that they can be negative. They're really just how we're looking at it. Do we look at it as a negative or as a positive? It's not the habit. The habits
exactly. Habit again has no, the subconscious brain, no emotion. It has no good or bad knowledge. If you drink my grandmother years ago used to own several daycares, and she every morning she would get her a bottle of Coca-Cola, the glass bottle, these little teeny ones. She loved those.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she claimed they were sweeter than the other ones. I don't know if that's true or not, but she'd have one every morning. Well, the doctor, as she got older, the doctor told her that wasn't good. The habit of her she never really broke that habit. She couldn't. She did it for 20 years, and she did it pretty much till she died. It was she just had that every morning at 10 o'clock, and it automatically, if people that eat a big meal who are smokers, there's a triggering effect. The worst time for smokers, I hear, is when the meal's over, they want to go out and smoke. It's just the natural thing. After sex, a lot of people like to smoke. After you wake up in the morning, a lot of people have to smoke. So there's conditioned things attached to the habit, attached to other behaviors that often take place. So the habit may have its own habit attached to it.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. Habits train, don't they?
Yes.
There are trains of habits, but it's not just one habit all by itself isolated.
Right. One of the things that I'm finding fascinating for me right now, as I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned this publicly or just you and I talking, but in October, I think I'm going to Portugal. I'm working out the details of my trip.
Yeah.
And I started trying to pick up Portuguese, and their Portuguese has two forms. One's Brazilian Portuguese,
right,
and one is European Portuguese. And while they're the same, they're not the same at all, apparently. So don't really know why. So I'm learning. Of course, I got the basics, the hello, the thank yous, the other stuff. It is so difficult for me to learn languages. It's always has been. It's ADHD trait. So I've tried all the different strategies, and the most effective one I'm finding is I'm finding Portuguese TV shows with English subtitles.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense.
That's the most effective way for me to learn. And I'm learning because I'm learning how they're speaking. So, I don't expect to go there when I'm with a full knowledge of Portuguese. But I with that, Google Translate, and most people speak English over there to some degree. So I'll figure it out. But
I'm sure what will happen is, what you described, I would say, is actually the second best way to learn. The best way to learn is when you're in the same room with a bunch of people speaking Portuguese.
Immersion is the ultimate, always.
Right.
Full immersion. I have one of my clients, exceptionally wealthy man, wanted to learn French. Rented a place in the middle of Paris for 3 months. Just decided he wanted to learn that. He went there and he walked in with no knowledge and just started asking food, in 3 months he speaks perfect. He claims perfect French.
Crazy to say, it is the language you are speaking. It is.
French are a little judgmental, stereotypically. But nonetheless, it is effective because the brain has no option. My brain is capable of learning, is able to do it. It's just the idea that it's not really necessary for me to learn it with all this stuff I have going on. And again, ADHD is a factor in how you learn languages in particular. But I'll be fine, and once I'm there, I think it'll greatly accelerate the knowledge I have of it because I will want to talk to everybody.
And the reason I mentioned the idea that habits train and that you can train on a habit. Not just that you can train on a habit, but also there can be a train of habits. It's both kinds of trains that can be involved. And the reason I mentioned that is because of the nature of how habits train and how we train on habits, that also becomes our route to taking control of habits. Yes. So on the one hand, it's a little bit convoluted in terms of, I got this whole string of habits. And like you said, I have to have my coffee in the morning. I have to have my eggs. I have my whole series of habits there. And that sounds overwhelming if you wanted to actually change that. You don't want to, obviously, because that's healthy for you. But if you wanted to, that'd be a little bit challenging, at least on the outside. On the other hand, the fact that you can actually literally train, you can train yourself with a new set of behaviors in order to establish a new habit. There's a great positive in there. And it's one of those things that it's kind of weird. On the one hand, it seems like it can trap you. On the other hand, it frees you. It's the same thing.
But that is everything we pretty much talk about on this show in life. There is really, it's your perspective that dictates your reality on different topics. So habits are either the most helpful possible thing that exists, or they're very destructive. And the answer is yes, they are. Both.
That's right. Yeah, it's absolutely true.
But that's it. It's everything looks at it. Habits, the habit of getting into the same relationships, claiming I will never want that kind of relationship again, shockingly leads to having the exact same relationship with another person often. It's there's no way I'll ever do that, and then we do it again because there's something in the programming, and it takes effort, knowledge, and an attempt to actually change to break those.
And why is it that if we're stuck in that kind of a pattern where, like you say, we're creating the same relationships over and over again with different people, why is it we have so much trouble recognizing that we're doing that? Everybody else can see it, but we have trouble seeing that. Why is that?
Because we have a denial process that takes place that, for whatever reason, we never know what causes attraction or whatever causes those things. There's something that is rewarding enough to override any perspective of it being negative. It's safety. It's homeostasis is what we know. Years ago, when I did some social work before I had to get out of that with all the trauma I would see these kids in. It's horrible. And taking a child from the most abusive situation imaginable. Just, I won't even describe it. Just imagine the most abusive idea you can come up with for a young girl in a household. Kicking and screaming, being removed from the home.
Yeah.
Now, there's nothing that is going to be worse than what took place in that house anywhere.
Right.
Nothing.
Right.
But the known was safety, even though it was so unsafe. She was conditioned to the known. That was her known.
That's one of those things that, you hear it, it makes sense, and yet it boggles the mind.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, 2 weeks after that, when I visited her in a really healthy therapeutic foster care home, entirely different child, happy, smart, quickly, children incredibly resilient. So all of that. But at that moment, all she knew was that. So why are you going to take me for that? I forget the name of the young lady that was kidnapped in Utah, and everybody thought the dad killed her, the uncle killed her. Turned out she was alive. And years later, when the police sort of recognized her and started asking her if she was with her captors, and she started denying. She said, no, I'm mistaken for that person all the time. She was defending her captors, even though they had done, again, sexual abuse to her, horrible things to her. That was her known at the time. And this is a really sharp, from a affluent family young lady that, Stockholm syndrome, for example, takes place there. If you've ever done much research on Stockholm syndrome.
Well, describe that briefly, just for people who don't know.
Best example, I love examples. Patty Hearst is the daughter of a famous, she's an heir to a fortune, the Hearst Publishing Company, Fortune, I believe.
Right.
And it used to have newspapers all over the world. And she was kidnapped by the Palestinian Liberation Army, PLA, I believe it was.
That was it.
And
yeah, that's it.
And so as she was with them, she started having sympathy for their cause. She actually robbed a bank with them, if I remember correctly. I'm pulling this all out of my head. So, but all that took place. And when she was questioned about it, they were talking about what criminal that's when sort of the concept came up that she related to it. She was brainwashed. She had to adapt to them or they were going to kill her. So she developed all that. And so she, it took a long time. I'm sure in therapy, I don't know how that ended up for her, but it was very, I can remember just reading about that in great detail. When people capture people, hold them hostage, it is almost a self-defense mechanism to slowly have empathy for your captors. It's your safest way to survive often. They let their guard down when you have sympathy or empathy for them. So the body's always looking to protect. It isn't worried about long-term damage. It wants to survive now. So it creates mechanisms to do that. And that's that process. So you can see how deep this goes. The body has really one mission, is to stay alive. It is to stay alive. Whatever dissociation is considered you hear that term a lot, and it's a protective mechanism where your brain will literally dissociate from reality to protect yourself.
Yeah. One of the things that is really great about the time we live in now is all of the information that's coming out of the realm of psychology, especially with the positive psychology, but just in general, because there is so much that is coming out, not just in terms of the theory of how psychology works, but the neurology of it, the physical side of it, and also the spiritual side and the emotional side. There's so much of all that is coming out, and as it comes out, more and more people try to adapt it in some way into their lives. I figure, okay, there's a tool there. I ought to be able to use this in some way. And more people are doing that. The thought that's going through my mind as I'm describing all this is, I wonder how this affects the cultural or even societal approach to dealing with that fear-driven factor that you're talking about, the one that says, my primary purpose is to stay alive. I wonder how all of this knowledge coming out affects and plays in that realm.
Well, and this is my theory. This is nothing at all.
Yeah, we're in speculation realm here.
Yeah, pure speculation. I assume when the body accepts positive psychology or positive thought is safer than negative thought, the body will switch over to that as a baseline. Again, remember, the body brain connection, the mind brain connection, is solely number one, above all else, survival.
Right.
Period. That's it. Everything else is a sideshow to the body. So right now, whatever protects is what we're going to always default to. So if enough people over a period of time switch from that negative worry base as protective and understand the positive attraction side, that law of attraction brings in all these other things, eventually, again, the subconscious brain, who has no opinion on anything, said, clearly, that's the safest route now. That's what we're doing.
That's an interesting way of describing it. It's basically saying that the way that we adopt new habits is by coming to the conclusion that that's the safest thing for us to do.
Absolutely. So for me and my addiction to gambling, it's not a logical addiction. I'll never defend, it never was logical. But I couldn't stop gambling. It just seemed like I would die if I didn't gamble. And I don't know what my end goal was. I don't understand all that. But it was obviously something taking place in my brain. So eventually in recovery, my brain solely accepted gambling is very dangerous for me. It costs me everything. So I have totally reframed my perspective of gambling into it's a dangerous thing. The mindset of addiction is a dangerous thing for me. And I even take it further with, I'm not an alcoholic, but I don't drink because I don't want my mind to be open to the concept of gambling because my inhibitions are lowered. So I stopped doing a lot of things because I want to never make gambling make sense to me for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I get that. And what makes sense, what you really mean is you don't want it to appear to be the safest thing to do.
Absolutely. And gambling seemed to be the only safest thing I could do at the time, especially when you're down $1 million and there's no way to get it back. Yeah. Gambling appeared to be the only way to get it back.
Right. And
spoiler alert there, Walt, spoiler alert, it didn't work.
It didn't work. Thank you for clarifying that point. That we're much better off for knowing that. That's good.
Yeah.
But I think there's a really cool thing in here. The fact is, if what we're saying is true, now again, this was speculative, but I'm agreeing with your speculation. If we are capable of deciding that a new behavior is going to make us safer, that becomes really the basis for how you make the change. That's something I've always asked myself. I knew that there were good habits that I should adopt. There were habits that I had trouble adopting. I had old habits that I was having trouble getting rid of. And I never really could grasp what does it take for me to actually shift it? I think this is it. We find a way to decide that the new thing we're trying to make a habit is going to be proactive toward making us safer, helping us stay alive.
Yes. And that is, again, strictly my hypothesis here. If we ever got to a place where there was enough reinforcement of positive, of reinforcement of what, there's not a lot of that going on in the world. The news isn't breaking news isn't wonderful news. Here's some great news that happened today. The breaking news is these people are bombing these people and the stock market's down 1,000 points. That's the breaking news.
Right.
So, so you're conditioned to that. But if we ever got to a place where you really looked at it the other way, because again, the body and the brain, you're born with this innate ability or a desire to stay alive at all costs. At all costs, it is survival instinct. Next to a mother's instinct, survival instinct is our strongest instinct. So, the mother's instinct tend to override all of that. The mom will do anything to save their children above their own safety. But as far as, with us, the survival instinct is there. So you're only looking to put yourself in situations that don't seem scary. So definition of that. So positive stuff seems outlandish to negative people.
So let's go back to the example you gave earlier in the show. You gave the example of Ugg and Hug.
Yes.
And in that example, Hug was the positive one, Ugg was the negative one, and Hug's positivity killed her.
Yeah. And so when you go back to the tribe who's hanging out in the cave, all the other people, Ugg tells the story. So everybody goes, oh my God, we can never be happy because it killed Hug. But Ugg survived. So again, it reinforced that general overall philosophy. So let's say, and again, more hypothesis here.
Right.
But if there's people that do have a tendency to have a positive outlook, if their genes are handed down over and over again as the ones that are the dominant gene, then there would be a predominance of positivity. We have a predominance of negativity because I believe this. I've made all this up in my brain, so I'm not claiming if somebody is a physicist or somebody that goes in back to Joel doesn't know what he's talking about. You're right, I don't. I made it up from my experience in dealing with thousands of people over the years. This is what seems to be the case for me. So in understanding, so I believe that like right now, I'm an entirely different person than I was in my 30s, early 30s. Far different. My perspective on life's different. I laugh a lot. I generally expect things work out for me in a fabulous way. I generally do. I have no idea. I quit even knowing. I don't even care how it works anymore. It just always does. Always to my benefit. I believe life is stacked in my favor. The deck is stacked for me. I believe that.
Well, let me ask you the question that was a kind of a follow-up to what I was saying before about Ugg and Hug. Ugg basically was the one who survived, and she survived by being negative. So like you were just describing, the narrative that followed was, well, you can't ever trust being happy. It's going to kill you, yada, yada. Right. What stops the person who in the modern age is faced with the possibility, he's listening to our podcast saying, yeah, we believe that it's a good idea to be positive. And he's saying, yeah, but that's what killed Hug. Why would I want to do what killed Hug? And I say that because I think there are a lot of people who are going to make that argument.
Well, and in different times, in different situations, we have different threats nowadays and they're not saber-toothed tigers at the pond.
Right.
It's there's a whole bunch of different threats out there, but yet when you're conditioned to scan the horizon for threats in today's environment, then you're only going to see the threats because that's what you're looking for. If you look at there's just as many positive stories taking place every single day in life as there is negative ones. They get no attention.
And that's what's so interesting to me about the story of Hug and Ugg, because it's just one scenario that had a negative ending to it, but it's not the only possible scenario.
Of course. Yeah,
there's another scenario that I can think of off the top of my head, if we're going to do caveman, cavewoman, is that Hug and Ugg decided to go in separate directions, and Ugg encountered the saber-toothed tiger, but at least was able to run away because he was looking for something, or she was looking for something really terrible to happen, and there it was, so she knew to run. Whereas Hug ended up stumbling upon Shangri-La.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's this psychiatrist and I have had this discussion years ago. I love these topics. He said he came up with almost the identical answer you did. He said there's an alternative scenario that likely had happened over the years. Let's say Ugg, who is so negative and nobody wants to be around her, leaves her tribe. And she may escape the saber-toothed tiger, but she's miserable and lonely. Hug goes and finds a very safe environment. They've learned how to kill the tigers. They've learned how to protect themselves, and she lives happily in that environment, doing the things she loves to do because she's safe within that environment. So Ugg would never have been accepted in that environment because she's so negative. So it could have gone the other way too.
That's right. And that's the part that gets lost with a lot of these stories. That's why I think people don't really grasp how important it is that they're paying attention to these negative stories that are out there. They believe that the negative stories are the only ones that count, but they're not.
Yes. They're the ones that get the attention. Negative sells, fear sells.
That's right.
You know, one of my clients today, a 12-year-old boy, told me, I said, what's the biggest concern you have right now? And he said, World War III.
Okay. Yeah.
And I said, wow. I said, what about a girlfriend? He goes, that seems insignificant.
Whoa.
I said, okay. He said, why would I have a girlfriend when the world's going to be blown up with nuclear weapons soon? I go,
yeah, I can see that. That would be a natural conclusion if that's what your fear is. Yeah.
And I said, bro, I said, why don't we switch off that TikTok news and, let's go do something fun. Let's get out and do, but even a 12-year-old boy, he has that knowledge that in his brain, he's already conditioned to look at all that. It is fearful. And right now, regardless of the channel, because both sides are equally absurd, in my opinion. All sides are equally absurd. And whichever one you turn on right now, there's a negative story about the other side.
Oh, guaranteed. 100% guaranteed.
Yeah. And and we have a tendency to only believe our side that supports that. Yeah. And it gets reinforced over and over again.
Right. And I think you just touched on what's for me the most important point of this whole habit chain understanding, which is we reinforce the negative over and over again if we're into the negative. We reinforce the positive over and over again if we're into the positive. And there's really no necessary advantage to one or the other, except for what we ascribe to it. In other words, we make it what it is. It isn't the thing itself that makes it what it is. We make it what it is.
Absolutely. Life is what you expect it to be. When you really boil it down, what you expect your life to be is eventually what is likely going to fulfill that way.
So I think we've come to the conclusion, and it's a great way to wind up the show. Your life is what you want it to be. So make it a good one.
And that's the beauty of it. To me, that's the reframe of all of this is your perspective is created by your reality, and you are solely in charge. There's nobody else in charge of your perspective. You are. So once you understand, that's the single most powerful message in my world. My perspective dictates my reality, and I alone am in charge of my perspective. That is the most powerful power I have at all. It is my superpower, understanding that.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to use my perspectives in saying I really appreciate this. This has been a good conversation.
Very good conversation. Went all over the place.
Well, actually, no, I think this was actually fairly focused this time. I mean, we compared to what we normally do, this was not deep rabbit holes. This is like, one track pretty much throughout the whole thing.
We almost got lost in the epigenetic conversation.
We did, yeah. But that was a minor, that was a side rail. That was all that was, yeah.
Yeah. We do need to do an epigenetic show because I love that topic. But
well, while we do that, we can do that next week. I'll send a note to Jen. We'll say we're going to do epigenetics.
Just tell her the title is epigenetics.
I will, and I will stress that is the only title.
The only title, epigenetics.
Because otherwise, she'll run through AI and come up with 25 others.
Epigenetics. Boom.
Thank you very much. Thank you, podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.